Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Millennial Project. I am at the Port of Los Angeles today, and it's a little bit loud. There's a lot going on behind me. This is one of the largest ports in the world. But I am here today because I want to talk about one of the biggest misconceptions that I believe exists in American politics, and this is a misconception surrounding trade. You often hear people say things like, we don't make things here anymore, all of our jobs have been outsourced, and they envision kind of sucked out cities like Detroit or Flint, Michigan, or other cities throughout the American Rust Belt. And while manufacturing jobs have indeed declined, trade is not responsible for the vast majority of this job loss. So if you look at the American manufacturing industry today, you will see that the industry is actually larger than it ever has been before. In fact, if you took the American manufacturing industry out of the US economy and made it its own economy, it would be the 10th largest in the world as of 2014. So it's been a few years since then, but to make a long story short, the idea is that the American manufacturing industry on its own is about as large as the entire economies of countries like Brazil, Russia, India, and Italy. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, American manufacturing jobs have been in decline. So how do we square this circle? How is it possible that the American manufacturing industry is larger today than ever before, but they are employing far less people? Well, the answer is technology. The industry has been automating, they have been building digital factories, and they are hiring higher skilled, more college-educated type workers who can interface with complicated digital systems rather than the more low-skilled, white, blue-collar worker that defined the American manufacturing industry before. At the same time, though, it is true that some of our jobs have been lost to countries like Mexico and China. The reality, though, is that the proportion of the jobs shipped to Mexico and China versus the proportion of the jobs that have been lost to technology is very small. And to try to illustrate this a little bit, we can look at one of the most widely cited reports on the issue from Ball State University in Indiana. The report tries to look at American manufacturing job loss from 2000 to 2010, the last sort of decade that we can analyze. And what the report finds is that roughly 5.2 million jobs have been lost in the manufacturing sector. The problem is that the report can only attribute 13% of this job loss to trade. The other roughly 87% of the job loss is attributed to technology. So this is really important to understand, because if we want to try to figure out how to cope with job loss in the manufacturing sector, the worst thing we can do is address this as a trade issue. And so in order to understand this a little bit further, let's just take for a second the idea that Donald Trump is going to be tough on China and Mexico, as he has mentioned in the campaign. If he attempts to do this and attempts to tell American companies that they cannot buy goods from China or Mexico using tariffs or other instruments, what will most likely happen is that companies will simply go to other countries with low-cost labor in order to substitute those goods. So this is really well illustrated by a situation that occurred with the Obama administration in 2009, where the Obama administration attempted to limit the import of Chinese tires because the Obama administration believed that the Chinese were engaging in unfair trade practices. The result of this policy, more so than reinvigorating the U.S. tire industry, was to send American companies other places looking for tires. And so the American consumer ended up buying a lot more tires from Thailand and Indonesia. The second thing Trump could do if he wanted to bring American manufacturing jobs home is try to tell American companies that they need to manufacture products in the United States. However, if this occurred, it is more likely that American manufacturers would simply invest in technology and more robotics in order to manufacture these goods, rather than investing in more employees. And to understand this, you can look at another widely cited report that comes from the Boston Consulting Group. This report attempts to look at the cost of a human welder versus the cost of a robotic spot welder. And what this report finds is that for the average company, a human welder costs about $25 an hour. A robotic spot welder, on the other hand, costs about $8 an hour. So you can see already that it is far more cost effective for a company to invest in a robotic spot welder rather than a human welder for most jobs. This is occurring, according to the report, across the entire economy as robotics become more advanced and become cheaper. So the issue is, if we try to bring jobs home by forcing companies to manufacture in the United States, those manufacturing jobs that people used to have 10, 20 years ago are simply not coming back. And I think this is really important for us to understand as millennials, because the misconception that manufacturing jobs have been lost to trade rather than to technology fuels this idea that America and the America that we're going to build should retract, that we should bring money home, that we should build walls, that we should isolate ourselves from our peers and countries across the globe. And I think this really sits in stark contrast to the millennial perspective on the world, which seems to encourage the development of a more open, a more internationalist society, a society that is driven by technology, and a society that really values diversity and opinions and cultures from a wide variety of places. So as we focus on the country that we want to build in the coming decades as millennials, I think it is important for us to understand this misconception about trade in American politics.